The wheel, lurching forward, drives the machinery of the tower to the next stationary point in a continuing cycle. This device, which in Susung's tower must feel like a minor earthquake every time it slams the machinery into action, is an early example of an escapement, a concept essential to mechanical clockwork. In any form of clock based on machinery, power must be delivered to the mechanism in intermittent bursts which can be precisely regulated. The rationing of power is the function of the escapement. The real birth of mechanical clockwork awaits a reliable version, developed in Europe in the 13th century. Meanwhile, Susung's tower clock, ready for inspection by the emperor in 1094, is destroyed shortly afterwards by marauding barbarians from the north. The Chinese junk, 12th century, 15th century. The design of the Chinese junk, a Western word from the Malayan jong, meaning boat, is perfected during the later part of the Song dynasty, when the loss of the Northern Empire increases the importance of overseas trade. A merchant fleet, and a navy to defend it, become essential. The resulting junk is an ideal craft for the South China Seas. The region suffers violent typhoons, so a strong hull is essential. The Chinese achieve this by means of the bulkhead, a partition across the interior of the hull, and sometimes along its length as well. Bulkheads make the hull rigid and also provide watertight compartments, invaluable when a leak at sea needs repair. The Chinese junk has other pioneering features later copied elsewhere. Traditionally built without a keel, allowing access to shallow waters, the junk is ill-equipped to sail a straight course until an important innovation of the Song period, the addition of the sternpost rudder. This is a large heavy board which can be lowered on a sternpost when the junk moves into deep water. Coming below the bottom of the boat, and capable of hinging on its post, it fulfills the function both of keel and rudder. Until this time, throughout the world, the conventional method of steering a boat has been by means of a long oar projecting from the stern. Another important innovation on the Chinese junk is multiple masts. Marco Polo describes seagoing junks as having 4 masts, with a further 2 which can be raised when required. Each mast has square-rigged sails. They concertina on themselves, when reefed, in the manner of a Venetian blind. These ships are huge. Marco Polo claims that 60 private cabins for merchants can be built on the deck, and archaeological evidence suggests that by the 15th century a large merchant junk is about 450 feet from the bow to the high poop in the stern, 6 times the length of the contemporary Portuguese caravel. In 1973 the discovery of a junk of the 13th century confirms much of what Marco Polo reports from the time of Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty of China, 1252–79. From 1252 Kublai presses south through the mountainous western regions of China, into Sichuan and Yunnan. His attention is distracted by the death of his brother, the great Khan Mangwu, in 1259. Kublai is elected Khan in his place by the Mongol nobles campaigning with him in China. But the same position is claimed by a younger brother, Arakboj, at Karakoram. Kublai defeats his brother in 1264. As Kublai Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire, he is now free to give his full attention to China. In 1267 he reveals the seriousness of his ambitions when he moves the imperial capital south from Karakoram to Beijing, a town severely damaged by his grandfather, Genghis Khan, in 1215. Kublai Khan builds himself a magnificent city at Beijing. Its walls are 24 miles in circumference and some 50 feet high. The Mongols call it Khanbalik, the city of the Khan, and under a version of this name, as Kambaluk, it becomes famous even in Europe. From this base in the north he sets about overwhelming the Song dynasty. As early as 1271, he makes it plain that he sees himself not as an invading barbarian but as the Chinese emperor of a new dynasty. In that year he announces a Chinese name for his dynasty, Taiyuan, meaning great origin. Ancestors are vital in China, so his grandfather Genghis Khan is given a posthumous Chinese title, Taitsu, Grand Progenitor. Kublai soon makes good these Chinese pretensions. In 1276 Hangzhou, the capital of the surviving Song dynasty, falls to his armies. The young emperor and his mother are brought to Kublai's court and are treated with civility. By 1279 there is no further Song resistance. The Chinese chroniclers record, from that year, the start of a new dynasty, the Yuan, the first in the empire's history to be ruled by an outsider. But Kublai Khan is determined not to be an outsider. He even adopts the administrative system of the Chinese bureaucracy. The only difference is that he employs more foreigners than a Chinese emperor would. One of them, Marco Polo, has left a vivid, if one-sided, glimpse of Mongol China. Kublai Khan is sovereign over regions more extensive than any previous Chinese empire. Even allowing for the fact that his authority in the Mongol territories in the west is only nominal, as the Great Khan, he has under his direct control Mongolia, Tibet, Manchuria, Korea, and the whole of China down to the South China Sea. Only one great prize escapes him, frustrating his clean sweep of the region. 2 expeditions against Japan are costly disasters, in 1274 and again in 1281, during Marco Polo's years in China. Marco Polo in China, 1275 to 1292. Marco spends 17 years in China, fulfilling a wide variety of tasks in Kublai Khan's administration. He is in effect a member of an occupying force, speaking Mongolian but not Chinese, so his understanding of the people is limited. But he travels a great deal, often trading on his own account as well as serving the emperor, and he describes many cities. Hangzhou is his favorite. He pretends not to be certain which is more impressive, the number of its bridges or the number of its prostitutes. His interests seem more with the latter. Those who sample these women, he says, as if speaking of someone else, are so much taken with their sweetness and charms that they can never forget them. Marco has often been criticized for failing to mention one peculiarity of China, the drinking of tea, which is already by this time a Chinese addiction. The 2 oddities which strike him most forcibly are a marvelous black stone, useless for building with, which the Chinese dig up and burn, one of the earliest references to coal, and their use of banknotes, see banknotes in China. Paper money is not a Mongol innovation, being in use already in the Song dynasty, but Marco gives a fascinating description of government officials stamping the notes with a cinnabar seal. The Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644. Kublai Khan's grandson and successor, Timur, contrives to keep order in the empire for a few years after the Great Khan's death in 1294. But a series of disasters in the early 14th century unsettles the dynasty. A civil war between rival Mongol princes breaks out in 1328. There is widespread famine. Disastrous floods cause armies of peasants to be press-ganged into heavy work on the river defenses. Rebel bands begin to wreak havoc, demanding the ejection of the foreigners and the restoration of a Chinese dynasty. The leader of one such band is a Buddhist monk, of peasant origin, by the name of Zhu Yuanzhang. In 1356 Zhu succeeds in capturing a town which he renames Nanjing, southern capital. In 1368 Zhu marches to seize the northern capital, Beijing. The Mongols flee north to the steppes, and Zhu announces the start of a new dynasty with himself as emperor. Like the Mongols, with their choice of Ta Yuan, he gives his dynasty a glorious name, Ming, meaning brilliant. Zhu inaugurates a custom of a similar kind which survives to the end of the Chinese Empire. He chooses a congenial name for his reign, in this case Hongwu, vast military power. Chinese emperors from this time onwards are known by the title of their reign. Zhu, the founder of the new dynasty, becomes the Hongwu emperor, though the phrase is often now used as though Hongwu were his own name. The new emperor turns out to be a strict disciplinarian. His officials must invariably run when in his presence, and misdemeanors are punished with public canings. Officials in Ming China are treated like prefects at an old-fashioned boarding school. The button on a mandarin's cap changes through 9 different colors as he rises in the strict hierarchy of the civil service. It makes for a well-behaved but unenterprising society. One exception to the otherwise undynamic nature of the Ming Dynasty is an expansion of China's maritime trade. Chinese sea trade, 15th century. The greatest extent of Chinese trade is achieved in the early 15th century when Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch, sails far and wide with a fleet of large junks. At various times between 1405 and 1433 he reaches the Persian Gulf, the coast of Africa, returning with a giraffe on board, and possibly even Australia.